World seed. Prelude. A success and finality hidden from eyes. Beget an infant of reality of heaven's despise. Last words of the first divine envoy. Solomon backed into a corner with the world out to get him. Seth sat cross-legged on the ground. A translucent bubble, surrounding a little further out than arm's reach, held his surroundings at bay, as the frown that rested on his face had finally disappeared. There wasn't much he could do anymore in his current situation. He couldn't even see out of the protective bubble due to all the destruction raining down around him. The ground surrounding the bubble he was inside had long disintegrated into nothingness. The dimensional shield bubble was the only thing keeping him and the dirt pillar underneath in place. Taking a deep breath, he reached into his robe and pulled out the only item he had remaining. Caressing the paper-wrapped object he knew was the focus of his current situation, a sigh escaped his lips. He thought, 1,000 choices, and I chose the wrong straw. Ignoring the hint of regret from pushing further into his mind, Seth began unwrapping the paper, and a strange energy pulse emitted as the object was revealed. He and all others in the surroundings felt something as Seth couldn't help but notice the bubble flicker. He had to admit, even the thought of all his troubles forcing him to perish like this was probably amusing from the outside looking in. Seth had nothing else on him anymore. His weapons were destroyed and storage trinkets were abandoned earlier. There was no point in regretting those actions as they were in trade for his life to reach this moment. His gaze focused on the object as he thought of everything he had given up, only to buy himself one brief escape after another. Those chasing only took a few short moments to realize the tablet he now held in his hand was not one of the things that he had left behind. Studying it again, Seth had long familiarized himself with the diagram on one side and the strange text on the other. The only real choice he had left was to use the technique scrawled upon it in conjunction with whatever force it was constantly expelling. It was either that, or wait until his final shield dissipated and all the different attacks currently bombarding it would fall onto him. Seth let out a self-pitying chuckle at meeting his end in such a way. All the struggle to claw his way up to the point formation stage was about to be wasted. He had not even got close to being an all-powerful Varith. He could see no more hope to survive. Cursing those around, bombarding him in his mind, he exhaled the long breath he had inhaled just a moment ago as he concentrated on the tablet. Seth held the tablet in front of himself with both hands, eyes intent on boring a hole at the starting point of the diagram. All surroundings falling from his senses, he focused his mind's eye inward towards his soul. With care, he began his search, attention precise on the so-called rebirth tether of the soul. No matter how much a soul changed, the soul tether always seemed to remain exactly the same. The best way to describe it was a sphere surrounded by a tube, embedded inside your spirit. It only faintly connected with the rest of your current self, and would change everything but its shape as you improved and evolved past a mortal being. Even those at the top were clueless if it could be improved in any way aside from that. There were stories. It was Seth's slip-up in revealing that the tablet he found targeted that part of a person. There were a myriad of other techniques that targeted the soul tether, and most would do nothing at all. No, some would damage it, and the person who performed the technique would wail from pain before dying an unpleasant death. If it weren't for the text on the tablet that explained the technique and the unique aura emanating from the tablet itself, he wouldn't even consider trying it out. Well, that in his current situation. Seth knew that he could either die now and somebody else would get the tablet, or try to use it and at least have hope for a chance, no matter how slim it may be. Shaking the thoughts away, he knew he couldn't drift off track once he began. The tablet contained the only known technique that seemed to do something to that part of your soul. With no way out and the bubble shield's strength waning, Seth matched the diagram to the internal view of his own rebirth tether. He began as he drew his energies inside away from that area. Slowly and with purpose, Seth pulled them through the willowy veins toward his eyes. Although this was the first technique he had ever heard of that used internal energy in such a way, he had practiced a little bit out of sheer curiosity. Just like when he practiced, Seth's eyes lit up and he began to glow a faint blue that seemed to darken as it expanded past his eyes. From the outside, the strange sight would seem like the darkening blue was somehow growing brighter due to the increasing intensity. Soon, it shifted past the normal sight, and all that was visible now seemed to be a haze of turbulent air leading from his eyes straight to the tablet. Slow and steady, Seth began to chant to himself as his energy traced the tablet's diagram. From bitter memorization of times past when he had tried to figure out the tablet on his own, slow and steady, Seth began to chant to himself as his energy traced the tablet's diagram. The completion of the technique described on the tablet, his only intent. Just as described, he mirrored it internally on the rebirth tether of his soul with absolute focus as he traced step by step, bit by bit, the entirety of the diagram. Just as Seth reached the final line on the tablet, his peripheries caught the shift. The lines and points he had previously traced folded in on themselves before blossoming into an even more complex array. In his sight, it somehow extended past the two-dimensional depiction into three, overlaid on a representation of his soul tether. Although the change surprised him, Seif carried on. The more he did, the more he felt the strange fluctuations from the tablet increase, accompanied by a pressure like he had never felt before, giving him a sense of doom. Line by line, curve by curve, Seif steadily continued, with complete disregard for those in his surroundings, until reaching the end of what he could see on the diagram. As soon as he met that last point, the tablet let out a pulse of energy that washed over him. As it passed, his tired eyes finally looked up and away from the tablet and watched astounded. No more attacks were being thrown at him, to only crash against his protective bubble. Observing the now visible area around, Seif could see what used to be a few hundred now looked like thousands of people in his surroundings at varying distances and heights. Beyond them lay even larger vessels floating in the sky of the tiny planet he had escaped to. A wry smile appeared on his lips. Even if these were his last moments, he let his worries go as a sense of peace overcame his mind as he mumbled, "I regret nothing." Seif wasn't wholly sure why they had stopped, as he saw several of them frown or talking to each other, as he could barely make out their lips moving from afar. There were a variety of different actions the others were all taking, all of which just didn't matter anymore. He had given it his everything, down to just the clothes on his back and the object he now held. A few seconds later, he felt a large tug, ripping the entirety of his energy out from him, stealing his breath along with it. He was sitting down, so while it was painful, he could suffer the extreme discomfort that left him as helpless as when he was born. At the same moment, all those in the air surrounding him began to plummet towards the ground. In the next 30 seconds, the majority exploded from the height of the fall on impact. Seif was shocked and a little happy at the same time, since they all had pushed him into his current situation, tracking him down all the way here on this no-name planetoid. Unfortunately, Seif noticed several that had survived, or were already standing once again on the ground. The thought crossed his mind to give up on fleeing after dismissing the bubble shield to attempt and run some more. That's when he realized there was no longer a bubble shield protecting him. He needed to leave while he still had a chance with the massacre that just happened. Attempting to stand up, he found that he couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He was frozen in place. With his eyes darting around in a slight panic, Seif realized that not a single person was approaching him. But that wasn't all he noticed. There was a distinct dark blue haze subtly warping the air and space around him. Squinting, he could vaguely make out a large web of energy spreading out away from himself, pulsing to an unknown rhythm like reality was about to shatter. Each pulse of the web glowed, drawing something in as the fluctuating lines of haze grew ever more distinct. The finer branches began to make themselves known, becoming visible to all. With each pulse, Seif could hear a deep thrum, a beat akin to his own heart. That thought struck his mind as the pulses were exact with his own. A bit confounded by what it all meant and what was happening, Seif looked back to the tablet. It had lifted itself up from his grasp, now floating in front of his lower chest, unassisted. Its color had shifted, matching closer to the eerie blue as his senses barely noticed it become cloudy. Lost in the sight of the shifting color and haze, several heartbeats passed. Seif was engrossed as the tablet lost its solidity, now looking closer to a smoky pearlescent silver, tinged in darker spots shifting into their own little strings. Realizations struck when he focused on the strings, as they matched the focal point with several intersections where he was copying the diagram after the three-dimensional version revealed itself to him. A low rumble met Seif's ears as he looked away from the spectacle of the tablet. His entire surroundings were now blotted out by a twisting and contorting space, the world around but a canvas to be crumpled up. The rumble grew louder and louder as he began to feel like something was wrong with the technique on the tablet. He recalled the excerpt given to him by the seventh researcher he had taken it to. There was no title, but only the following words: "The cost is not which 100, or 1,000 can pay, but those in the void can forever remember everything after." Seif began to ponder over the cost until noticing the tablet was now similar to his surroundings. It had completely integrated with whatever energies that thrummed around him in the booming rumble. It all crawled toward him as he could only watch, frozen in place. The backdrop to the entire scene was now a contorted mess as the tablet sunk into his lower chest. To those present, their eyes only had enough time to send a millisecond of a visual. Everything around them seemed to phase into nothingness, accompanied by a sound that could not be described as Seif and the others followed suit. Thus, a void in the universe was born, several thousand light years across, later referred to as the edge of space. Anything that passed a certain point in any direction surrounding where Seif sat that day was annihilated, and the tablet lost.